All right, y'all, we're begrudgingly beginning part 3 of this video series, the transmission removal. I've already got the rear drive shaft out, so we're gonna work on getting the front drive shaft out, loosen up some of these transmission mounts, and hopefully get this thing pulled out of here tonight. It is Thursday. I'm hoping to have this thing finished up by Saturday afternoon-ish. All right, we got our rear drive shaft tucked up out of the way, and we're just gonna go ahead and get these shift levers off. So I got the cotter pins out, and hopefully I don't lose any of these parts. Looks like they're on there pretty good, so we'll get that out of the way. And I'll just move this one out of the way as well, if we can. Might have to shift it down. There it goes. All right, tuck that up out the way. So now we got our shifter levers off. I think what we'll do next is work on getting this front drive shaft off with a 1/2-inch wrench. All right, we got the front drive shaft out of the way. Now we're going to start working on these transmission cross member bolts. All right, we got that thing out. It doesn't look big in comparison to the truck, but I promise you that thing's pretty damn heavy. What do you think, Josh?
It's not light, but it's not the worst thing.
All right, well, we're going to put it on the workbench and we'll get a better look at this thing. All right, we got a little bit of a snafu going on with the clutch here. So let me show you guys what's going on. So as you can see, the release bearing, or as some folks call it, the throwout bearing, is pretty well shot. I'm sure that's going to go eventually, so we might as well change that while we're in here. But while I was in the process of removing that, we broke a spring, and I'll show you guys where that spring goes. So let's get this out of the way. You can kind of see back in there, we've got this ball bearing retainer and then a spring keeper clip right here. And that rat that was living there pissed all over the place, and you can see it's really corroded in here, and it's pitted the casing here. But it also got on that spring. In fact, there's a little bit of its nest still right there, so we'll go ahead and get that out of there. But anyways, so we need to do a repair. The spring broke when I went to pull that throwout bearing retainer out, so let's go take a look at it and weigh our options. So there's the ball that rides in the little retainer cup, and then there's the spring that broke. As you can see, it just got a little too weak and then decided to break. So this is probably a universal part that we can get. There's some more of that mouse nest. That dang mouse cost me a bunch of time and money now. So anyways, let's get this figured out. I just want to show you guys kind of how that went together. So here's the device that we've rigged up to pull the input shaft bearing, aka release bearing or throwout bearing. We've got a 32mm socket, and then a little torch action, and then my 3-jaw puller. So hopefully it just pulls it straight up off the shaft. We'll see. Got one of my compañeros here. He is one of the guys that helped me paint the truck, so only fitting that he should help me replace this truck part. What we're gonna do, we'll take our crescent wrench here and we'll just tighten this jaw up, and it should pull that release bearing right off of there. Whoops. And there it goes. All right. So now we'll reinstall the new release bearing. We'll probably need to, really, an arbor press would be the ideal tool for this job, but we don't have one of those. I also wanted to notate the direction of assembly real quick. So this raised part is on the back side, and then the front of the bearing is there. So we'll just have to remember that for reinstallation, is this part goes face down, just like that. There's how we know that the release bearing is bad, and then you can hear how much racket it's making there. So that's no longer tight. That's going to cause a lot of vibration when you push the clutch in, which is exactly what I was doing. Here's what we came up with for the clutch return spring. This is a clutch return spring for a 72 to 75 Jeep CJ7. Looks pretty comparable to the one that came out of the Gladiator. And then there is the Omix part number. I think that came from, Omix Ada, Atlanta, USA. So right down the road. So that's what we're going to do. It should work swimmingly for our intents and purposes. All right, we got our new throwout bearing installed. You can see that spring is poking through right there on the retainer. The best way that I found to do it is hook it up on the backside first use the clutch throwout lever to hold the pivot ball in place. That's what this indentation is here. Center it up on the, I guess you would call this a coupler or whatever. And then once everything's held together, just press this throwout bearing, hold everything together, and then pull the spring through and hook it up with a pair of needle nose pliers. So we got our flywheel here. As you can see, we've got a little bit of distortion and just some pitting. Not too bad. I don't think it's like warped or anything like that, but we're still gonna clean it up a little bit before we reinstall this clutch and engine. I've got my DA sander here with some 120 grit sandpaper. We're just gonna go over this and try and clean some of that crud off of it and see what we're left with. Well, that'll tell us if we've got any high spots, low spots, anything like that. So let's go ahead and get this thing fired up. And we'll just start making our way around the outside of the surface here, trying to hold it as level as possible. Now that we've knocked off the top layer of dirt and rust, you can see that we do have a little bit of pitting here. So I'm hoping that we can knock this down with this 120 grit. But either way, it's going to be better than it was, and I don't feel like spending the money or taking the time to have this sent off to the machine shop. And it's really not all that bad aside from a little bit of minor pitting. It doesn't look like we have any terribly high spots. So we're going to keep at it with the sander for a minute, and I'll show you guys what we're left with. One thing I did want to point out is you can see like right here, the striations in this flywheel right there, right there. They align with the pattern of the clutch disc. And so I'm guessing what happened is because this truck sat for so long, the areas in between where the clutch was making contact with the flywheel was where it started to pit and rust. Moisture was able to get up in there and just kind of eat away slowly at the flywheel over the time. So I actually bumped it up to 40 grit just because we were having a little bit of a hard time getting it down, but we're starting to make some good progress. We've almost got all the deep pitting out. The reason we want to do this is all this pitting is an area where the clutch isn't going to be making contact with the flywheel. That's going to lead to slippage, reduced clutch life, all of that stuff. So we want to try and address as much of this as possible with the clutch out. So here we've got the new pressure plate, clutch, and flywheel on the workbench. This is installed dimensions. We can see that the release levers are actually fairly far sucked in. I'll get my tape measure out real quick, but installed height of the release levers is sitting at about 1 inch. So let's go ahead and get the old pressure plate and clutch installed, and we'll see what the installed height of that is. And here we have the new clutch paired with the factory pressure plate. So the spring height's just about the same, I would say, which is no more telling than what we started with. Let's put the factory clutch and the factory pressure plate together and see what we got. Here's our last configuration, the factory clutch and factory pressure plate. We can see that this is sitting at about 1.5 inches from the clutch hub to the release lever. So obviously we have a lot more space, which would, I think, account for that missing distance in between the release bearing and the release levers here. So this seems to be the winning combination. I mean, this clutch and pressure plate's smoked though, so I don't really know what we're gonna do here moving forward, but at least now we can attribute that gap to something, which is some sort of improper adjustment on the new pressure plate, or perhaps the thickness of the new clutch disc is too much. We still need to determine exactly what's going on here, but we're making progress, and we'll continue to check back in with you guys as we get some more info. So the root cause of the issue ended up being that we weren't getting enough travel from the clutch fork. You can see I marked on the input shaft with Sharpie where the release bearing was traveling to, and it wasn't far enough to push the pressure plate arms in. Now we're looking at the pivot ball stud. You can see there's a good bit of gap, about 1/16 of an inch, between the clutch fork and the pivot ball. So effectively what was happening is that was changing the angle of which the clutch fork would pivot. What I did was I shimmed the ball stud with 2 washers, and you'll see how much more travel that simple adjustment has got us. We gained about 0.82 inches of travel, and because of that, we're now able to fully engage the release bearing and push it into the pressure plate release arms. I would also like to notate that the pilot bushing that was included in this clutch kit was too small to work with the input shaft of this T85 transmission. You can see here that it was about 0.66 inner diameter, and if we take a look at the input shaft, we'll see that the input shaft has an outer diameter of 0.77 inches. All right, we got it up on the jack, T85 transmission, fixing to go back in. There's probably a little more I could have covered on this, but I'm trying to get this thing running. I just got the CJ7 back in the garage, and I also just ordered a new toy, which I'll show you guys in a couple videos soon. But basically, it's going to get this thing back on the road, so we're going to go ahead and slap her in here. We do have a little bit of excessive play in the input shaft. I don't know if you can see that. I'd probably estimate like 32nd of an inch of run out or so. But without doing a full rebuild, there's not a lot we can do about that. I did find the input shaft bearing for 20 bucks or so. So I can go ahead and order it, and then when we get a little bit more time to do a full rebuild and whatnot on this, we can do that. What the issue actually ended up being was the pivot ball there was a little bit of play between the fork and the pivot ball. So I shimmed that with a couple washers, and you can see we get a lot more travel out of it now. So that should solve our clutching issue. And yeah, that's about it. All right, we got it about in position. Now begins the monumental task of lining up the input shaft with the splines on the clutch, and then eventually getting this angle to match up here with the alignment pin. So I think we need to tilt it back just a hair, and we'll use these leveling assemblies on the transmission jack here. And what we can do is just grab our crescent wrench and just kind of work it backwards a little bit. Other way. Oh, yeah, there we go. Give it another turn there. And you can't really see it from here, but it's starting to level out up top. So we'll just keep leveling it out, try and shim it in there. So we got the transmission reinstalled. You can see up in there is the shims that I placed on the pivot ball stud to make it engage with the clutch fork a little bit better. We did have to replace the clutch over centering spring here. Not too big of a deal, just went and got one from Ace Hardware. And everything else is about bolted up. We got new cotter pins on our shifter levers. We've got the e-brake hooked back up again, drive shafts hooked back up. The only thing we've got left to do is install the notched keyways for the cross member support here, and then there's one bolt that goes in there for the transfer case support that I don't have yet, so I need to go get another one of those. We got the transmission back installed. That's going to wrap this video up. I need to get the oil out of my Cheyenne that needs an oil change, and I'm going to put it in the Gladiator just to test fire it, make sure that the head gaskets aren't leaking, and then from there I'll be able to put some diesel oil in there, do a full oil change. I also need to adjust the timing and a few other things before it's roadworthy, so I just wanted to get this video out there. Hopefully this is informative to some of y'all, and we'll catch you next time. On a quick side note, we did take the Storm DLX 250 out for its maiden voyage yesterday. You can see got it pretty muddy doing some single track and a little bit of trail riding. Unfortunately, I did slide out on an ice patch, which I might link in this video, but you can see I busted one of the bark busters, and I also broke the shift lever off, so I'm waiting on a new shift lever to come. But I'll have some more content coming on this machine soon. It's been really fun having it, so I hope y'all enjoy. We'll catch you next time.